during that period when I worked as a refinery operator at the Point-à-Pierre refinery. And it isn't lost on me that I started my career in the energy sector, and I'm ending it also in the energy sector in the sense of the role that I currently play. Over the years, the OWTU has called for greater transparency and accountability in the energy sector. Therefore, it is fitting that the union should be holding today's forum with the theme of transparency and accountability in the energy sector. Also making similar calls for transparency and accountability with the South Trinidad Chamber of Industry and Commerce, where I served as Vice President of Bobby Montano in those early years, the chamber now known as the Energy Chamber, and also the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute, where I served as chairman for 3 years. Also, individuals called for greater transparency and accountability, and among them were Anthony Paul, who was my riding partner in some of our campaigns to get the man in administration to embrace the EITI or not leave the EITI. Also Dax Driver and John Andrews. Interestingly, on the 17th of April, which is today's date, exactly 1 year ago, and in this very hall, President General Roger made a different call as he launched the union's national tertiary debate program. He accused the population of taking the labor movement for granted while failing to show respect for labor leaders. He said that it was crucial for the survival of the labor movement that it collaborates with all the tertiary level institutions. He said, and I quote, "We need to collaborate so that we can build awareness among the citizenry. It is a requirement that after all the achievements we have made from these," he says it's regrettable that after all the achievements we made from these struggles, people continue to take it for granted. He went on to say that the OWTU had been struggling for over 75 years to defend the cause of its members, and I again quote, "We are still struggling for fairness, equity, and our mission is far from complete. We have to build a consciousness that is so lacking today," end of quote. That was exactly 1 year ago today. And the union's Chief Information and Education Officer, Ozzy Warwick, said among other things on that occasion, one of the questions to be debated is whether the concentration by trade unions on wages and salaries occurs at the expense of social issues. Clearly, those two men were raising issues at that forum exactly 1 year ago, expressing a deep concern about the role of the union and its relationship with citizens of the country. I don't think much has changed in that period, but one of the things that has changed is that there is a partnership going on between the EITI and the trade union, the OWTU, that in fact is going to assist in addressing some of these social ills identified by Ansel Roger and by Ozzy Warwick a year ago. And this is good news that I bring for you, that the possibilities are now here, that by working together to the mutual benefit of the union and TTEITI, you are not only going to be, as union members, contributing to the advancement of the cause of your union, but you'd also be assisting in an important development in the life of Trinidad and Tobago as a whole. On December 8th, 2010, the government of Trinidad and Tobago honored a commitment it made in a pre-election manifesto promise to join the EITI if elected. That promise in the election manifesto of the PP coalition was a promise that I'm sure the OWTU had a hand in putting into the manifesto, because David Abdullah was very involved in the creation of the manifesto pre-election, and I'm pretty sure that the OWTU had a hand in getting the coalition to promise that if elected, the government would join the EITI to bring greater transparency and accountability to the energy sector, so that the OWTU can see itself as the parent of the EITI in the same way that other people who lobbied for that initiative can see themselves as having been part of the parenthood. In addition to that, since the formation of, that decision by government, it followed that a steering committee, which I chair, was set up to oversee the implementation of the EITI. And from day one, Cabinet had identified the OWTU to be a member of that steering committee. So not only was the OWTU a parent of the EITI in terms of that manifesto promise, but also the OWTU is today managing the process for the implementation of the EITI, so that the OWTU sits in a very influential position in guiding the process. We have been lucky to have had two very good representatives of the OWTU around our steering committee table. The first one was Rosa May Whittier, and the second one, Ozzy Warwick, who's our current member. Now, you would admit that Rosa May is a lot better looking than Ozzy. And she was very different, equally dependable as Ozzy, but very quiet, unassuming, and very, very willing to do anything that was asked of her. Ozzy, on the other hand, is more of a macho kind of representative of the union. And he told Mark Regis and I recently, he says, if this EITI is ever threatened, as happened in the past, just let me know when you want the union to start making noise. And Mark and I said, okay, that's a promise, Ozzy, we'll let you know if and when you start, we need you to start making noise. And indeed, if it ever came to that, I hope that the OWTU will come out in the defense of the EITI and also bring along other labor unions as well and their membership to do that. The background to the EITI is that it was launched in 2003 out of a recognition largely by civil society organizations and international donors like the World Bank and several governments, that many countries like Trinidad and Tobago that are rich in natural resources suffer underdevelopment, poverty through mismanagement and often corruption. And over years of studying the phenomenon, it was felt that a mechanism had to be developed that would bring transparency and accountability to the energy sector that would forestall that continuing trend of underdevelopment in countries that are rich in natural resources, while other people in those countries and abroad line their pockets. And so the EITI was born, and it was actually formally launched in 2003, with Trinidad and Tobago being one of the first subscribers to the initiative. There's a lot of interesting information about how it was formed, the composition of the steering committee, who benefits and how, contained in a leaflet that you have there called a fact sheet of the EITI in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, because of the limited time, I'm not going to go into those details now, but I'm urging you to take that fact sheet home with you or the office and to read about the EITI, how it was formed, and where we are at now. Essentially, the benefits accrue to all the stakeholders because it is a multi-stakeholder initiative between the government that manages the natural resources of a country as trustee for the people. Secondly, the extractive companies that invest in the extraction process in the hope of making a profit. And thirdly, civil society that represents the people who own the natural resources of the country. And the three groups benefit from the implementation of the EITI. Very briefly, the government benefits because it's a signal that by joining the EITI, the government is serious about improved management and governance in the extractive industries, and that is serious about tackling corruption. The companies benefit because they are now able to operate on a level playing field. They can put in their bids for wrongs in a more competitive way, confident that they are not going to be called upon to pay bribes, etc. And it's a protection for the long-term investments of those companies. And the citizens benefit most of all because the EITI requirements that there be disclosure on an annual basis of the payments made by the companies to government, and government's disclosure of the monies they receive from each of the respective companies. And these two sets of figures reconciled by an international auditor to make sure that there are no discrepancies, and if there are discrepancies, to seek to reconcile the discrepancies and then publish a report in simple language. Each of you will end up getting a copy of the report so that it will easily explain how the resources that are being extracted in the country are being generated. So the people are benefiting, and the country will benefit because the civil society participation in this is going to create a more participatory democracy in Trinidad and Tobago, something that the OWTU has always wanted. Now, what is why is it important that the OWTU supports this initiative? You have supported it so far through the representation on the committee. And more importantly, we are in an era where our resources are in decline, and therefore one could expect that naturally there'll be less revenue coming to the government in future years. But the EITI could reverse that trend because the checks and balances of the EITI initiative are going to plug some of the leakages that now occur, so that you might find that even at a time of declining reserves, the revenue accruing to government might or should rise, so that it would be in OWTU's interest to have that happen, so that the pie is not diminished that you need to have for your members. Undoubtedly, the EITI is an initiative whose time has come, and there is going to be no turning back. The legislation was just passed in the USA and the European Union that will support the EITI principles of disclosure, transparency and accountability. Countries that have not yet joined are on the verge of joining. Obama has committed the USA to join, and we may get an announcement from the USA as soon as early as next month. Australia is looking at joining, and we may get an announcement next month as well. So do Canada, etc., etc. So the EITI is a win-win situation for the three stakeholders: the government, the extractive companies, and civil society, and more importantly, civil society. This is why OWTU must see this as part of its creation and must help nurture it through its service on the EITI steering committee, and it must be prepared to fight for the survival